So just some reminders to turn off your cell phones. Yeah, we've got restrooms just across the hall, and I will turn it now over to Andrew Lightman, who's the managing editor of The Rad.
I hate these things. My name is Andrew Lightman. I'm managing editor of The Rad. I want to welcome you to the first Ward 6 Matters. These are going to be a series of, unlike our national discourse, civil discussions between wonderful panelists on issues that matter to us that live in Ward 6. But before I do that, I want to first thank the Hill Center. We actually had 3 co-conspirators on this sort of idea. Charlotte, who works for the Hill Center, who's their programming leader, myself, and of course Chuck Berger, who runs the Ward 6 Democrats. If you don't know Chuck Berger and live in Ward 6, I'd be stunned because he's everywhere. And the 3 of us thought, after Chuck and I organized a whole series of public debates, that there was a real desire for people to come out and discuss civilly and listen to what different ideas of what could be in our city. So this is essentially a brainstorming session. So we have a representative, Mr. Matthew Marcou, who's head of public space for DDOT. Matthew will be talking sometimes as Matthew and sometimes as Mr. Marcou for DDOT, depending. We have Nancy Metzger, who you will all know. She used to be on HBRB and is a very, very famous preservationist and member of CHRS. We have Dave Alpert, who's from Greater Washington. We have Meredith Fascett, who is the chair of ANC 6D. And if you don't know where that is, it's everything below the freeway. So it's the area that probably has seen the greatest single build of any area in the city. It's where all the cranes are. And then, of course, Charles Allen, who's here both as to be Charles and also to see if you might glean any good ideas, because he is an idea man and a legislator. And thank God, our elected council member. So, do not yell at me on Twitter, Michael. That being said, I want to thank our sponsors for all the bids. Southwest, Capitol Hill, and Capitol Riverfront have all stepped in to co-sponsor. CHRS, the Ward 6 Dems, the Hill Center, Charles Allen, Alyssa Silverman, who's another one of our wonderful council people. And I may have forgotten, the Waterfront Village and the Capitol Hill Village. So we have a huge amount of people that have sort of stepped in to help get the word out about this, and we really appreciate their efforts. So again, we're going to be taking questions from the audience. This is going to be a conversation with a little bit of moderation from me, but not much, between the panelists. You'll notice, unlike debates, there's no timekeeper, except maybe if Norman starts glaring. And think of it as a brainstorming conversation that may, and if it's successful, we might get one really good idea that might end up in practice. So, we're going to start with a poem. The sun was shining on DC, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the potholes smooth and bright. And this was odd because it was the middle of the night. The time has come, the moderator said, to talk of many things. Of autonomous vehicles and speed bumps and bollards. Of Ubers and roads shaped in rings. And why red light cameras stop speeders. And whether cars should have wings. We are all here to discuss the public's role in the district's largest asset, public space. The public realm consists of all the elements outside private property lines and all the air that is beyond what property owners are allowed to develop as a matter of right under our current zoning. So those of you who live in R4 townhouses, that would be all the space above the 4th floor that you're not allowed to develop without a huge argument in front of the zoning commission. We will also, for the purposes of this discussion, be excluding the federal realm because we have no control over it. So with that, I'm going to pose the first question, and then I have some that have come in here, and if you see this, this is a card. If you write in it and send it to me, it may get asked. And this nice lady over here will be collecting them, and then I have a couple of questions that have come in from over the interwebs, which Al Gore, of course, invented. So we'll start with a fun question, which is, who should decide and what should be allowed to operate on the sidewalks? And in particular, this comes in from the interwebs, because it has to do with, and the woman was asking particularly about motorized scooters, which have suddenly appeared on our sidewalks. And would you like to start? It would be easier if you held your mics, contestants.
My mic's not working. Sorry, my mic's not working.
Well, you guys can just jump in, or I don't.
At any time on this one particularly. I want to thank you very much, Andrew, for putting this together. This is an excellent opportunity to engage in public discourse. Sorry. This is an excellent opportunity to engage in public discourse, which is invaluable to the operations of the government and making sure that we reflect the people whom we work for. You are all my boss. What it comes down to is this. What's that purpose or goal or use of that area of public space? So what is a sidewalk's purpose? It's a very functional purpose. It's got not just a sidewalk, but it's got street trees, it's got street lights, it's got meters, it's got roadway signs to regulate the use of the roadway, it's got signs to regulate the use of the curbside, it's got trash cans, it's got 1,001 uses. And as a very functional element, it means that it's probably an element that should be generally slower in its use and in its operations. It's not a roadway. It shouldn't have vehicles traveling across it at high speeds. So generally speaking, I would, and this is more Matthew than DDOT, I would say that you're looking for things that can effectively operate at lower, slower speeds.
Anybody want to jump in on scooters?
Yeah, sure. The good thing is there's like nearly a consensus view on scooters, which is great. Everybody agrees. So Matthew's correct in terms of how do we try to think about different spaces and different uses. What I think the city struggles with, we all struggle with, is how does new technology or new uses kind of enter our environment? Government being that incredibly efficient and nimble vehicle that it is, how do we then kind of keep up with something like that? And we saw this play out largely with our dockless bikes, right? So the market kind of gets flooded with dockless bikes. And to some degree, we embrace the chaos in that we want to try out new things and embrace some of the chaos to it. On the other hand, we got to figure out how do we help navigate what this looks like. I can tell you from my inbox and everything else, I got no shortage of complaints around this bike was left here, that bike was left there. But I also got a lot of emails and feedback from people saying, wow, it just got a lot easier for me to get around my community, get around my neighborhood. I used to have to, I would drive to the metro. Now I can just jump on a bike. So our challenge is how we do both of those things. And with the bikes, DDOT came back with a set of recommendations or rulemaking essentially. I don't get that many complaints about dockless bikes anymore. I will say that what I do get is that the proposal from DDOT right now, which I think puts too tight of a cap on the number of bikes, is problematic. But having the locking mechanism and things like that, people aren't, I'm assuming you see the same thing I do when I'm walking around the neighborhood. I don't see bikes across the sidewalk and things like that. So part of it is that we have this new technology that comes in where we embrace the chaos a little bit. It's disruptive, but it's innovation happening in real time. And our challenge is how do we make sure we're protecting safety, we're protecting use, and then we try to play catch up a little bit. Scooters are the next thing of what is our challenge and how to get it right. I think that we've got scooters that are too fast on sidewalks. I think our rules and regulations are set up in a way that really the motorized vehicle is really more about an electric wheelchair chair. But I know that MPD is clocking these things at 15, 20 miles an hour, and that's not the right mix on the sidewalk, I don't believe. But we have not invested. Like if the argument is you don't want to see them on sidewalks, you'd rather them be out the roadway. I'll argue back though, we have not invested in safe bike lanes, if that's one of the preferred routes, to where if you're on a scooter, you see that as a safe alternative to be able to travel safely. And it all gets to all these different uses of how do we call it the first and last mile of the trip. How do we get it so that I get you out of your car? If you're going to Metro Rail, or you're going, you're running over to Eastern Market, you're running downtown, how can I do it in a way that you don't feel like you gotta get in your car? And scooters are one way to do it, but we are struggling with, we're trying to find that balance, we'll catch up to it, of how to manage it in the right way.
It would be nice if they weren't silent.
Ring a bell as you go.
No, so the electric cars, they actually engineer noise into the cars because otherwise you can't hear them coming. Same thing with scooters. Maybe that's
Like a little whistle in front, so as they go by, there's a little whistle.
or just a rumble.
Too much noise will not be a good thing.
Yeah, then I run right into the noise.
But in thinking about this, I thought what is different.
Hold it up.
Oh, sorry. What is different about this is that with bikes, people have an expectation. They know how to use these. I'm not sure people yet know how to use the scooters safely on a sidewalk. I've seen so many people making very tight loops around people as they go down the sidewalk, and one sort of twisted ankle or something is going to throw the person into the scooter. And I was thinking what we really need is some videos where people can understand what the difference is. The person on the scooter just sees ahead. The person who's walking doesn't feel that. And so when my husband and I went to Wales, we used a video that showed how you perceive driving on the other side of the street. And I really think we need something so that people could see how the scooter is operating with pedestrians. It's not like you're on the playground, but it's with different kinds of pedestrians walking different fastness. And to me, that would help with safety as well as keeping the capital.
And so for me, all of these are really great points, and these are things that we have to figure out with the scooters. The way I think about policy issues like this is, if there are a lot of different competing questions, can we look back to overarching statements or policies that the city has said about its goals? Have we said what we want to achieve with transportation that pertains to something like scooters or the bikes? And in this case, we have done that. We have a sustainable DC plan and a move DC plan. And the sustainable DC plan in particular says we should strive for having 25% of the trips, commute trips in all 8 wards in DC happen by walk, bike. They wrote that before scooters, but let's say that scooters probably fit into that because it's more that than the other things. 50% on, 25% on transit, and 50% on transit and 25% on driving. And we're not there. The driving mode share is quite a bit higher. The transit mode share is lower and it's going down. It is at like 39% and it's been declining. The walk bike mode share is about 17%. So we have about 8% more to go. And that's by 2032, I think. So we have set as a city an objective of we want to achieve. So how do we achieve that? And what's exciting to me is that the scooters and the bikes, I'm most excited about the electric bikes, the jump ones or other, the Capital Bike Share Plus, Cabby Plus bikes, because they, I think, can work well for people in all parts of the city, people who live beyond Ward 6 in areas that are very hilly, that are somewhat far from the jobs, and they still can be very valuable. And then scooters have a very strong value for people who are taking mostly a little bit shorter trips. And we can, envision a city and a transportation system that makes these a more integral part so we can get to that 25%. And I would like to see our policy be geared around setting that vision and then figuring out a path to go there. Right now, I think they're being regulated. There are these questions that we have to work out, but therefore they're being regulated by TDOT a little bit as if they're a nuisance, and maybe if we just didn't have them, that wouldn't be so bad. We should say, yes, there are these questions to work out, but let's envision a bigger future, and that includes things like the lanes, like Charles was talking about. So there is a place that's not the sidewalks
To be fair
for this.
to DOT, they did spell the word private. Meredith, do you have comments?
My comment is very similar to the panelists here, and I do think we're still figuring it out. And the conversation we'll be having in 6 to 8 months will be have more information, and we'll have more trial periods, and we'll see what has worked. They're clearly very popular. I see them in our neighborhood all the time, and we've been thinking about what are the implications. And for example, we thought a lot about with the All-Star game, with the dockless piece. Where are we going to see the scooters? Where are we going to see the bikes? And by and large, it worked out fine. So people are figuring out how this interplay works out, and so it'd be really interesting to follow how it progresses and what elements of the existing policies get the most pushback and where we are in the near term.
Now,
I just have one, for just a reminder, I mean, when we tried bike share, remember when bike share first rolled out, we had, as a community here, we had some pretty good fights over where should they be located, and, you know, there were a lot of projections about these were just, it was gonna be the end of the world. We pushed and pulled on it, and then we actually got it implemented, and it works really well. So the bike share system, I think it's a great example that David was bringing up. That's kind of several years ago. So we're just we're right back in some of the same arguments and considerations. And I will imagine that a couple of years from now, we're going to be able to look back and kind of see how we worked through it and got to a great place with the dockless bike. Perhaps we'll figure out the dockless scooter. Can you dock a scooter? I'm not sure. And probably whatever the next technology is a year from now that we haven't even thought through yet, it's going to completely come onto our public space.
we're gonna get autonomous cars on LaFont Plaza. What think about that? Now, here's another one, and we're gonna start with Meredith on this one. We've had, in the last 10 years as the city has developed, we've had a proliferation of private streets. The best example locally is actually C Street, which is a privately owned street owned by Stanton Development that runs from Eastern Market back to between 8th and 7th. Another example is the Wharf. And if anybody's walked down there on, other than a Saturday night when they block it off, you've probably seen some of the issues there. And now Meredith ANC is looking at 1.5 Street, which, believe it or not, if any of you remember where the, it's in Yards West, or people don't know where that is, but where the trapeze school is now, down near the stadium, it's gonna go from M Street all the way down to the river. And that's also, they're talking about a private street there. So private streets, good idea, bad idea? What do you think?
I think private streets can be very exciting. It's a really interesting opportunity to pilot new ideas and to build unique locations that take the best of our standards and then adapt it for what we're trying to achieve in this portion of the neighborhood. And so one thing that's exciting about 1.5 Street is it's curveless. It's not the same as the Wharf. It's based on a different way of thinking, but this flexibility of sometimes it's a parklet, maybe sometimes it's a drop-off zone. There are places where there are medians with substantial space in the middle, and it's a completely different experience. And it's about, I think, 3 blocks. It starts just south of them and it goes to the river. So it's certainly a permanent commitment in the sense that we're building it, but it's not that it stretches the expanse of the city. I think it will be quite an exciting area within Navy Yard when we see how it works out. And you wouldn't have that flexibility if it was a standard street. And so I am looking to the promise of what they're gonna try. The nice thing about 1.5 Street is everyone's incentives are aligned to make it a thriving, successful, safe, usable street. And we also have the benefit, because it ends at the river, you can sort of have an exciting terminus and a beginning. So I think if done well and designed well, it's a pretty interesting opportunity.
So Charles, you were in the middle of the design for Wharf Street when you were Tommy's chief of staff. What do you think the lessons from that are?
When, as that street's gone in. There have been pros and cons with it, and I think that's, as I try to think about whether it's 1.5 or actually half street southeast, there have been conversations not in terms of private, not making it a private street, but thinking about how to partner to create some of that exciting activity that could really create this really great experience from him and the metro down to Ballpark, for example. But on the wharf side, I'm also very cognizant of the challenges we have. So for example, the wharf wants to be able to make sure that the street can be managed from a parking perspective, but it's not like the wharf can write parking tickets. So then how do we navigate that with DPW and DDOT to be able to have meters that manages to turn over the parking space on a private road that they can give DDOT or DPW the authority to then write tickets on it? We've kind of struggled with that one, of trying to help figure that piece out. They try to use Park Mobile. They had a lot of problems of being able to get Park Mobile set up to work on that. And then, of course, there's the issues of, I think it's a great pedestrian experience when there's no vehicles down there. And I think it's great. I would like to see it closed more to vehicles, because for that handful of parking spaces and for the handful of vehicles that come through, as a pedestrian, it just doesn't feel like a lot of fun. But when there's no cars and when it's closed, it is an incredibly active, vibrant space that the businesses are able to expand out, be able to have that additional seating and space, so it's great for the local businesses. Creates a sense of activity and just right along the water's edge. So there are benefits to it, but there's the challenges that we're still trying to figure out.
Matthew, when a private street goes in,
Yes.
DDOT negotiates a set of understandings with a private provider? How does that work? What's DDOT's role on a private street?
So I'm a very operational person, right? I work snow duty, public space inspections, and so quite frequently what I think about in terms of the elements that we're talking about with a private street are how does it get plowed? How does the trash get picked up? How does the pothole get repaired? How does the sidewalk get repaired? So two basic elements that I try to incorporate into our discussions with private developers about that is, first, we'd like to see as much as possible, while maintaining the special, unique character and flavor of that area, something that if DDOT were required to take over, we could take over relatively easily. So something that at least has a base to our standards, and then a roadway that has a width to our standards, so that we're able to move in seamlessly if necessary. Who here knows that 4th Street, north of M Street, is a private roadway? 4th Street, southwest.
This is in front of DCRA.
In front of the DCRA
Next to
building.
Safeway.
That is a private street. What? By flow. Okay, because that happened 30 years ago, 40 years ago. A little sooner than that, I was actually thinking of the alley on Canal Street, because my mind goes everywhere on these things. But the fact of the matter is, in the end, these are very valuable assets. And it doesn't even take it necessarily being a private street for that to happen. For example, when the city center was developed, when they rebuilt the network within the area that used to be the convention center, there were 2 roadways that were rebuilt, 10th Street and I Street. And the segment of I Street between 10th and 11th is a public street, but is closed except for emergency vehicles. And they maintain bollards there, and they activate that space very much in the same way that the Councilmember was saying. And very much the same way that Meredith is envisioning for 1.5 Street. The idea being that these are public assets, they're quasi-public assets. What matters ultimately, back to your question, Andrew, is I want to make sure that it's well documented and it's well understood, because I don't know about you all, but the next time the lottery hits 1 point whatever billion, I am totally winning. When that happens, if I've been working on it, the person who comes behind me needs to know what I've done. So I need to make sure that it gets recorded, which is why frequently in our office for these unique uses, we find a way to get it recorded with the recorder of deeds, so that a document is filed against that property deed, and it travels with the deed, so that the people who come behind us can go to that record, because those are some of the best records maintained by any government, and know what happened. So short answer is I look to make it operational. I look to keep the special nature of it, but I also look to make sure that it is done in a manner that the people who come behind us can know about.
Nancy, you watched the negotiation for the PUD for Heim, which restored the L'Enfant plan with a private segment. What did you learn from that?
Well, it was great to have the L'Enfant plan restored. And actually, that part of the technical thing, I kind of, after we got the restoration, and that wasn't a hard sell. I left all the rest of it to somebody else. So I am not a good person to talk to about this.
What do you think of private streets?
I think of all the things that Matthew said, those are good points. I think also, and I know this was true with C Street, that it had to be done according to DDOT's regulations, their specifications for those things. So I think that is very important. Listening to Meredith, I thought, well, okay, and that's a little bit different because that situation is kind of like campus plans, where those things, whether it's in east, over across the river, St. Elizabeth's East, where all the streets, they did it according to their requirements in terms of layout. So, and that was very good, and we take it now that it's been turned back really into the city's hands. And we take it and we use that. So I don't have, that wasn't a street. I don't have a problem. They've made the street. And policing it, you know, there are issues about policing, whether it's policing, or all the things that Charles talked about.
Now, I'm going to go over to David, because David always has an opinion.
Well, everyone's made all the points I would make, so I don't want to go along. I would just say, you know, there are a number of streets in Northwest that are in between numbered streets, and they have names. So it seems to me like maybe we don't need a bunch of decimal street names.
Totally have to come up with a new name.
Well, I actually want to go back to the wharf for 1 minute, because I think there is an issue there that didn't come up in discussion, which was a developer controls the street. The incentive is to use as much of it for commerce as they can. In the wharf, you see this because when the street is operational, the sidewalks have been narrowed as the wharf has taken more and more of the riverside for private use, primarily restaurant use. So how does the city on a private street make sure that we keep enough egress on a public sidewalk that it's comfortable walking? Charles?
I'll let Meredith jump in that too.
Oh, do you want to know?
But we can go first.
Well, I was going to say, at the risk of not being able to dine in Navy Yard, we have been using the dual levers of the Public Space Committee and the alcohol license to try to sort this out. And so we're, as much as we all love the outdoor cafes, and I know my constituents love them, I need 10 feet on First Street. That's how you get to the ballpark. We need 10 feet on M Street. And because it's all new, it's a trade-off. And they say, well, it might be bound by the public space, so give it to us in the alcohol license. But I've learned you can't do that. You don't have to hold all the pieces. You can always expand. You can never retract. And so I'm using those two levers. So when I think about the wharf, I don't think of it as the roadway in this context. I think of it as that it's creep into the public space on the sidewalk.
Right, except it's public-private, that's the thing.
Well, this to me, if I can helicopter up for a little bit about just public space, let's just think about for a second the sheer volume of our public space that we've decided we are just going to reserve for metal boxes with wheels on them. Most of our public space, we've decided, we just ceded it all to cars, parking of cars, storage of cars, travel of cars. It means that we're fighting over a relatively small scrap for pedestrians, for activating commerce. I mean, imagine, Meredith's 100% correct that we've got to have the right width for that sidewalk to be able to safely pass by, right? But I think most people would agree that when you have a very active, animated sidewalk where you've got outdoor seating, so whether that's, I don't view it as a negative that commerce is taking place, that benefits the business. I think it benefits all of us. I think we have more eyes on the sidewalk. We have a more lively experience. We have a better livability and walkability to it. The part that I think is our real opportunity as we work on, whether it's DDOT's planning, whether it's big campus planning that we're trying to think about, is that we have the ability to help shape what these look like, and that we're not kind of just fighting over the scraps for the last couple of feet on the edges, but we can really be thinking about how do we best take advantage of these public spaces for all of our uses, which is going to include cars and buses, but that we need to have the space for our bikes and for our feet and for our strollers and for our walkers and everything else.
I'll mention that.
So let's move to cars for a minute, our favorite friends, and buses and things that go boom on the street. A prominent member of
Hopefully not too often.
not too often, only if they're food trucks. A prominent member of the Green Team who will remain nameless sat down with me the other day, and I was explaining to that person that if you are the MPD does not enforce laws for moving violations unless somebody is run over and they see it. And that person explained to me that MPD had a lot of things to do, that they have other things to do. So the question is, with pedestrian safety, how do we get drivers to behave on our roadways? Because at the moment, they are not. And I'm going to start with, let's start with, you're about to jump the gun, and then Charles. Well, you're all getting a chance.
Hear what Charles has to say first. So there's a lot that we can say about that. So yes, I think that we first of all, we need to be taking a much stronger, we need to be acknowledging that we have a Vision Zero plan. The mayor has decreed that safety on the roads is a primary thing. I know Charles was just at an event that pertains to Vision Zero. I live in Ward 2. There were 4 people that on bikes or scooters that were killed in the last 6 months in Ward 2 and other people elsewhere in the city. And so we need to be starting at this with an eye toward, I talked before about starting with overarching principles. I would come back to that. If our principle needs to be that we have to do what it takes to make the road safe. And we need to have experts figure that out. And we have not been always willing to do that because of the things Charles was saying. So much space is devoted to cars, and there's a lot of sort of ingrained, traffic engineering practice and things like that are about moving traffic.
Okay, David, one
Yes.
big idea that you would do to make it safer. Just give us one off the top of your head.
For one thing, I would start having cameras again, but I would do a few things with the cameras that we hadn't done before. I would make them so that they're more commonplace, but they charge you a small fee, like $10. They do it right away so that someone who breaks the rule maybe gets like something in the mail the next day or the day after instead of 2 weeks later, and that it's more certain. This takes the philosophy from criminology when it comes to like enforcing the laws against drug dealing or whatever. You want frequent, certain, and fair. And I think I covered both those: fast, certain, and fair. And so that people are going to be always caught in there, but not too high of a penalty. And we're not willing. That would be based on criminology philosophy, the way that we would most design a program that would lead to law following, as opposed to making it punitive to charge people a lot of money.
Charles?
Are we talking big picture, or am I talking one thing?
You got the mic.
So David mentioned, so before I came here, I came straight from a pedestrian memorial walk. I see Anthony Dale here, who was with me over there. We had 10 people killed on our streets this year, pedestrians. I was walking for my friend Carol, who was 70 years old and was killed in a crosswalk a month ago last Monday. She went across the street to get a cup of coffee. And a car turned in the crosswalk and she's dead. I think that as a city, we are placing, we're putting a higher priority on the convenience of the car than the priority of the pedestrian. And there are good people at DDOT. DDOT frustrates me and drives me crazy when it comes to implementing four-way, all-way stops, doing pedestrian bulb outs, making this a higher priority. And I know that at times they've got federal pieces they got to try to figure out. I can be sympathetic to bureaucracy, but I don't feel the sense of urgency that I believe that it really needs right now. And just, the walk that I'm on just kind of just really helps even sharpen that more. What's one very immediate thing? Well, can I do two? Two immediate things that I would do. We can talk about enforcement. We can talk about all those pieces. I think a huge amount of it comes down to design. We've designed our roads and our intersections to move cars as fast as we can, not people. And so I think that pedestrian bulb outs, when you go to take an intersection, especially in a residential neighborhood, bringing those intersections closer, it improves pedestrian visibility. It means that it's safer for turning. Over and over again, it just makes sense for us to do this, rather than just having lots of asphalt that sometimes barely even gets used. But it puts the priority on pedestrian. Converting I'd say that we start with all of our residential intersections, I think should be always stop, and then let DDOT prove to us why it shouldn't be, right? Like right now, it feels like we're having to kind of prove to DDOT we think it should be an always stop. I would actually flip the presumption. We should start with an always stop. And if we think that if they make the case to us that from a transportation perspective, this is why it should be changed, all right, we'll have that conversation. But I think we should completely flip the presumption. We start with an always stop and then argue it the other way.
Meredith, what about you?
I'd like to put three. So I think that there are places where communities have identified there are problems and it takes too long to get it fixed. And so perhaps I'm overly optimistic, but we're going to do an overview of all of Navy Yard later this month. And my hope is we identify the 20 spots, and there are 20, where we know what the answer is. It's an always stop, it's a reorient this crosswalk, it's an add a bulb out here, and then we can just do them. And it's hard to know from our side, is the backlog, the contracting, the contract process, the procurement, the budget, sort of, or is it just the human capital to review all these requests? In addition, what I found, especially, remember, as an AC commissioner, it's hyper local. So in Navy Yard, I also think about where can we narrow streets and a little bit of maybe getting creative on the neighborhood side, sort of implement some changing public art. So for example, we have this alley parallel with M Street before L, where cars come out of a garage and they race down it. And the neighbors are always frustrated, but there's not enough traffic for speed bumps. And so what I tell people is one thing we could think about, and DDOT should close their ears, we should get some big planters, put them out there. And now when people have things to look at and the street is narrower, they're going to slow down, because we will never be able to sufficiently disincentivize people's desire to get out of this parking garage quickly. So it's, please fix the things we need to fix quickly, maybe narrow the streets when we can, and implement art or other things for drivers to look at. So not that they get distracted, but so they would slow down.
I'm good.
I was just going to say, in addition to the design things, I mean, we started turning right on red with the gas and all that issue. But now, and I will use Pennsylvania Avenue and 7th as a major problem where people don't stop and turn right. They just make the big circle without even stopping. And there must be other places like that, I know there are, where turning right on red no longer means stop and then look and see. It just means keep going.
Well, we've had a degradation in traffic car behavior. I mean, how many people remember when a yellow light meant you stopped instead of gunning your engine to run through? Or if you were going to take a right on red, you stopped, you looked, and then you took it. I was nearly run over at 9th and Main because I was walking north. There were 3 SUVs in a row, full road, and the last lane, which is to take a right going north on 9th, that person couldn't see what I was doing coming across with my crosswalk light. She came on 40 miles an hour. And if I hadn't screamed bloody murder, I would not be here addressing you. Matthew, you get the last word on this one. What do you think?
Well, apparently I have a big to-do list, so I gotta go. And I certainly look forward to the city council funding the extra FTEs we need for us to be able to implement all of these very important safety ideals. And let's be very clear about this. This is human capital. These are human lives, and they are the priority. Everything we do starts with safety, and always should start with safety. So there are many thoughts that go through my mind that particularly came up today in the Public Space Committee related to the fact that, like, Vermont Avenue in front of Grimke. Sorry, it's not Ward 6, but it's, I'm sure you've got your version of this. Okay. They're going to have a 7-foot sidewalk. That's all we've got. We've got 7 feet of sidewalk. We've got 66 feet of roadway. It's 130 feet total. It's got 25 feet of public parking. Raise your hand if you know what I mean when I say public parking. That's what I'm talking about. That's the green space from the sidewalk to the property line. And that's awesome. 25 feet of that green space. That's great. But only 7 feet was left for sidewalk. And that was a decision made by people decades upon decades ago who had the idea of creating these giant spaces. Okay. U Street is exactly the same. I live near there, so that's why I'm used to it. Sorry. By the way, Chico on 8th Street, I'm totally stealing that. That restaurant is awesome. I'm coming back here more frequently. Hold these so I can have like more to do this. But it comes back to the following. What makes that awesome? It's a walkable space, right? Eric's Road is a walkable space with inviting places to go. And the creation of those is very important. But everything you're talking about has an unintended consequence. And that's what we have to be very careful about. We think, for example, that creating all-way stops should be a default. But now imagine that you're the driver, and raise your hand if you drive a car. I also drive a car, right? Now imagine if every intersection you came to had a stop sign. Great. You become, you say great right now. When's the last time you experienced that?
Georgetown.
And did you love driving through Georgetown?
Yes.
Okay. That's wonderful. That puts you in the tail, that puts you on the 2 standard deviations off the norm.
But Matthew, but is our goal to have the drivers love driving? I mean,
yes, and I'll tell you why. This goes to something that no. We talk about these being cars, they're not. The roadway is actually a stream that handles all of our goods that come to our properties, right? It handles all of the services that come to our properties. So it is an important conduit and has been engineered, sometimes improperly, and sometimes poorly, but it was also done by people who had good intentions at the time, such as taking right turn on red because we were in a gas shortage. I don't know if you all were here when that happened. I was born and raised here. Yay, go DC. Anybody who lives outside of DC is crazy. The point being, though, that when it was implemented, it stuck in my mind. I was like 16 years old. It stuck in my mind that the person who headed the Department of Public Works at the time, because there wasn't a TDOT, but the person who was implementing that, like put tremendous restrictions on it all over the city when it was first implemented, including 7 a.m. no turn on red, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. signs at many intersections. The idea being that that person saw the need to break that idea's speed and trajectory because of unintended consequences. So I think these are very important and valuable ideas. But I also want to point out that there is a lot of thought and engineering that went into creating what we're working with. And by being a bit more intentional, which is what DDOT ultimately tries to be, about implementing these very important and valuable ideas. By the way, bump outs are my personal favorite. the Alpert crosswalks are my personal favorite. It is a valuable element of the decision-making process, and we love the ideas, and we have to look though at what the ultimate consequences of those are, because what happens is people get into a habit. People get into a habit of right turn on red after stop. They drop the words after stop, because now it's just right turn on red. Oh, it's red flag. I can turn right. So the idea is creating the intentionality in people's behaviors with an understanding that the decisions we make now have to be built in a manner that directs behavior in a positive way rather than with unintended negative ones. That was a long way getting to that point.
Can any of this be solved by technology? Do we have red turn on right speeding cameras, or any other ways that we can use technology to control moving violations?
Yes, I have a set of inspectors who work in my office. They're awesome, but occasionally they have been known perhaps to drive perhaps a little too quickly through places where there are speed cameras, or perhaps take a right turn on red without coming to a full stop. At those signalized intersections where that occurs, I'm not telling stories out of school, I think everybody knows that occasionally people violate the law. And it happened to me driving my mom's car, and she paid the ticket. What happens though is we get that ticket, and we assess it to that driver because we know who has the vehicle, and that driver is responsible for that ticket. So in the end, there are cameras that aren't just speed cameras, they're not just red light cameras. They are also right turn on red violation cameras. They are.
Your child?
New York stopped doing right on reds, and the world did not fall apart. New York City, I think, made the right decision, and no right on red, and
Correct decision.
they made the correct decision. Thank you very much, and it works. And what it does is, I was born in 1977, so I did not know until I had to look at the history of it, of how we got right on red. So I'm an entire generation that only knows right on red. So to me, until I learned about it, until I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense, I accepted it because it was my own experience. So now we have generations that right on red is just accepted. And then, as you talk about, it then kind of creeps into the like, well, I'll just kind of slow down as I roll through my right on red. I think that to be able to achieve the safety, if we are serious about Vision Zero, if it is more than just a really good slogan, if we mean it, when we say Vision Zero, we actually mean zero, then it takes us making bigger decisions. And I think, for example, right on red. And there may be places, maybe we can help go halfway, right? Like maybe it's no right on reds downtown, or no right on reds, within a half mile of the school. Maybe we can find ways to do it if we can't get the whole hog. But I think that we got to be able to say that's the decision we're going to make. When we think through an always stop. I mean, I've had this conversation with the DDOT director, and it drives me crazy. I like Jeff. He's a good guy. I just disagree with him on some things. 8th and D, Northeast. Anybody knows that intersection? We fought like hell to get that into a full-way stop there. We finally got some stanchions out there and all of that, but the response back is constantly, well, here's what might happen. People who are driving on 8th Street know there's a light the next intersection over, so they may not come to a full stop at the stop sign, so therefore we don't want to put a stop sign in because it'll just aggravate the drivers, and it may just kind of roll through it anyway. Well, let me deal with that with enforcement. Let me go talk to Commander Kane and work on getting MPD there. But give me the always stop so we have a fighting chance at it. I do appreciate it. I've had great conversations with DDOT director, and I do believe there's great people again at DDOT. There's folks in there now kind of experimenting with, I love this phrase, the tactical urbanism. Try things out. If it doesn't work, I mean, to some extent, like when we did the bike lanes on Pennsylvania Avenue, man, we messed that up a couple of times before we got it right. But, it's a bucket of paint. It doesn't work right when we come back and try it again. When we try it again, I would rather us fail fast, figure it out, and then come back and make changes. And that's what I want to keep pushing, and both in partnership and then at times push. our Department of Transportation to think about these things in a way that uses our public space. It can be a little bit, let's pilot it. I've told the director, I'll take all the heat from everybody in Ward 6, and just say it was my idea to go try some things out. And if it doesn't work, then let's go fix it. But let's go try it. Just kind of standing still isn't getting it done.
Well, what about enforcement? Do you how many of you guys think if MPD is not going to actively make a real active effort to enforce moving violations, who should do it? You want to talk to it? You got the mic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think this gets to the design point that Charles was making before. You know, we can do with cameras, and I talked about that. But to the discussion we're having, what I would say is, you know, while some things are engineered intentionally, I think that also the traffic engineering profession developed a set of procedures that were very well intentioned over the late half of the 20th century, but that were organized around metrics that looked at vehicle throughput and vehicle level of service. And there were a bunch of people that were genuinely trying to do the right thing. And this isn't national, it isn't like, you know, this is the profession came up with level of service oriented metrics, and that creeps into a lot of the individual decisions that then get made because people are accustomed to, well, this is a way to do it that's comfortable and usual. And then something like the four-way stops that Charles was suggesting, it's like, that's not usual, prove that that is okay, because it's not sort of what's in my manual all the time when I learn in school. And in order to get to Vision Zero, what we need to be willing to do is kind of err on the other side. It's like if, I remember hearing this analogy when we were talking about the financial crisis, like if you're shooting baskets and you always miss on the left side, then, you know, you should move over the way you're missing. You need to miss kind of as often on the right side as the left in order to be good, right? And we tend to be, I think, still, we were like saying, we're over here, and we say we need to get over there. But we need to be willing to kind of miss on the right side some of the time as well. And so I appreciate that Charles wants to sort of take the heat for that, because I do think that that's the most important thing. Is there have been a number of examples where in the past, DDOT, because people at DDOT really want to do the right thing, they're great people, they would do something and they would get a lot of blowback, often in other wards. And, you know, we need to make sure that people feel comfortable to make those mistakes.
Nancy, do you have one big idea to make the road safe?
Well, I do think it's enforcement. And if we're not going to have MPD, then we need to find the cameras and those things, but we also need to have people. I mean, as probably everybody in this room has had an experience of almost being run down by a right turn on red. And it's not what should be happening. So whether it's another set of people, you know, Public Works has people standing there. I don't know if that's even feasible, but some people who are.
I have enough problem monitoring the curbside.
Yes, enforcement is good, but I mean, it has to stop. And Charles's point that all of us, we have now generations that do look at this as very different, and that's where we have to go back.
You get the last word.
We need enforcement. There is no just one thing that's going to happen all of a sudden. We got it. We do need enforcement. I introduced on Tuesday a fairly novel idea, at least for DC. It's actually it works in a few other places, and that is to actually deputize residents, go through training, but to be able to actually use these things that probably almost everyone in this room has, either in your purse or your pocket, to be able to use it to help add to the enforcement. We would start it very small, we pilot it, see how it works, but there's other places in the country that actually use it, so you have a video or photo, you have the date stamp, you go through these processes. That's also the type of just new thinking I think we've got to bring to this. Again, let's try it out. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but let's try it.
I have one question for Matthew. Are there such things as no U-turn cameras?
Not that I know of.
Now, let's shift to a different idea, which is also public space. So everybody who owns a piece of property can develop it within a certain envelope, which is defined by zoning. If they want to do something that occupies more of their lot or goes higher, they go through a process where the public, through the BZA, which is an appointed board, or the zoning commission, decides that this is a good idea and they can have the additional FARs, the spatial density. What I want to ask is, and the biggest process that this is done is with what are called planned unit developments, which are Meredith's stock and trade. These are when large developers come in and say, hey, we'll give you, 20% affordable housing, let us go up another 5 stories. So what I want to ask is, of the panel, is are we doing everything that we can to get the best value when we give away public air rights? And is it being done in a process that is transparent so the public can actually understand what's going on? And I say this because there was a development not too far from here, the Hine deal, that resulted in neighbors stopped talking to each other as a result of that deal.
I think they finally started talking to each other again.
Yeah, that may be true. But I think part of the reason was the deal was so untransparent that it was very, very difficult for people to understand the value they were getting in the trade for density. So why don't we start with Meredith, since you've done how many of these?
Oh, I couldn't even count them. And certainly if you think about all the PDs my colleagues have done before me as well. So there's certainly information asymmetry, right? The ANC, we do our best due diligence, we have a general sense for the projects in our neighborhood, but we don't know you can look at purchase price of land value, but sort of how the developer calculates the economics of any project and any deal. And so we're walking in with information asymmetry. And then we have to think about what are our priorities as a community. And so in 6D, we are stalwart advocates for affordable housing. So we will trade a lot to get affordable housing. Now, a lot of this is bounded by what zoning will allow, and inclusionary zoning, and density trade-offs, and so we operate within that. But
And you're also coming in at the end because DEMPED and
Sure.
the city and DDOT and every other city agency has been to the table before you.
certainly, so when you're thinking about air rights directly above the envelope, a lot of that has sort of been predetermined. They're coming to you with a proposal they are comfortable, they're fairly confident is going to pass through zoning. And so we are on the margin trying to tweak that. Maybe we're eking out a couple extra units, maybe we're getting a bigger bedroom size. We're trying to figure that out. When you talk about the transparency is incredibly important. One thing that's challenging is that when you think about any particular PUD, there are so many different elements that you're negotiating for. Even putting aside that OP has already been there and DEMPED has been there. Okay, so we want this plaza area in front designed like this. We want X units of affordable housing. And we want ground floor retail that's going to have these additional parameters beyond what you developers are proposing.
Don't forget the dog bags.
We are always now, anytime I ever have leverage, I need an on-property dog walk. I've got many, many, many dogs and not any grass. So there are all these different elements. So it is challenging if you are a community member and you see, we're seeing this in the M Street Southwest parcels, and your priority is affordable housing. And don't get me wrong, it's incredibly important to us. But we're trying to build this thriving town center. So my colleagues, but frankly all of us, worked for months and months to carve out this space is going to be a community center in Southwest. Well, once you get fantastic 6,000 square feet of like prime frontage space with no rent and no taxes for 30 years, there's not a lot of juice left to go get additional affordable housing units. And so that is where it's incredibly important on the ANC to understand the priorities of the community, but also for the community to elect people that they trust to make the best judgment at the time. Because we are trying to optimize each and every single PUD for the best total package we can get. And some maybe we eke out every last penny, and some maybe we don't, but that is our intent, and that's how we think about it.
Charles, how would you address the information asymmetry?
Well, first I'll say, no matter what you think of PUDs, and they certainly are not perfect. The alternative is by right projects. And by right is going to almost every time result in less affordable housing, less investment in public space, less investment in everything else. And so sorry, great question. PUD, planned unit development. So that's the shorthand here, but that's when a development is going through a project. They are basically trying to trade off, in most cases, density or massing through a zoning change. And they have to get the agreement of all these different places, and they have to go before zoning to get it approved. And so what Meredith's talking about is the A&C's role in trying to help shape that.
So the building, whether the building occupies more of an existing lot, or is higher, or has more floors.
So, so it means going beyond what their initial zoning is a shorthand for it. In terms of asymmetry, one of the things that the High project actually led to were legal changes in the DC law around some of the transparency. If you remember, one of the big challenges we have is getting information out of DMPED, the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development. And so we were able to make some of the law changes now to where more of that information is now able to be open to the public. From the asymmetry standpoint, though, overall, we just introduced legislation to the council with Councilmember Meredith that would actually put more resources into the hands of our ANCs to give them more assistance, like legal assistance others. Our ANCs, and I see a lot of commissioners here, do an incredible amount. Remember, all volunteer. Many of them already have full jobs. They're working 20, 30, 40 hours on top of just all of their regular work. And they don't have a big budget, they don't have staff, yet we're expecting them to be able to have that type of ability to go in and negotiate. And not every single, I mean, we have a lot of attorneys, but not every single person's an attorney. So this would put more resources into the Office of ANC so that our ANC commissioners have more resources to draw on. And I think that then benefits their ability to fight for and leverage the things that they can. Remember, a PUD does not come through the council, actually. So I try hard to work to support the ANCs when they are going through this process, but PUDs don't come through the council, so I can't write zoning. So this is an area where the ANCs have incredible power. We just want to try to give them more tools and resources as they're helping fight for the right thing. And the last piece I'll add to it as well is, and a lot of people in this room have observed also the growth of PUDs as well as the ANC's influence on them. It was not that long ago that we would frequently see, you know, a PUD in exchange for support for a PUD, you know, there was the backpack giveaway or something. That community benefit was gone within 30 minutes. Our ANCs now are incredibly thoughtful around those investments in public space, the generational investments that will surpass all of us with the decisions that get made, because we're not going to come back and build that for 100 years. And I think our ANCs are really doing a great job helping get the things that we want, whether it's housing, investments in public space. It's just, they're doing a great job, but we just want to give them more tools.
David, I know, wants to talk.
Fine. One thing, about a few quick points about the overall structure of the PUD and everything Charles says, right? The key thing, which he was alluding to, is the zoning flexibility is granted in exchange for public benefits, for community benefit. So what is that? What is that benefit? And how much do we articulate what it is? Number one is, you know, in addition to the backpack thing, a lot of the PUDs have been, and still I think sometimes are, there's a payment to like a local nonprofit or something like that, and we can do more. There's already been a push to restrict that and force them to be the long-lasting kinds of things that 6D has been asking for. We can make that more explicit and insist on that. Another thing, actually, that's in the bill that I believe that Charles was talking about, that he worked on with Meredith, is that there would be a public database of what the benefits were for other PUDs, so people can look at the other ones going forward. The third thing is that one thing that's I'd love to see the council do in the upcoming comprehensive plan, the bill for the comprehensive plan, part of the comprehensive plan, the framework chapter that they may mark up this fall, and then there are going to be another 25 more chapters of the comprehensive plan, including neighborhood-specific chapters, as well as chapters on things like solid waste management and other stuff. But when it comes to PUDs, the council has the power to articulate to a greater extent what kinds of benefits we would like to see. So I love that 6D wants affordable housing to be highest priority. I would like for the council to say citywide that should be the highest priority for all PUDs. And that doesn't mean it's the only priority, but it means that it gives some guidance when the zoning commission is making those decisions. As part of the work I've been doing around advocating on the comprehensive plan, I have been analyzing other jurisdictions and what they do. And Arlington and Montgomery County, for example, do more front-end proactive planning to look at different areas and say, here are the benefits we would really like to see in Wheaton or in Crystal City or whatever it is. And if someone is coming in with something, we have said up front what it is. 6D seems to have done that, somewhat informally or non-legalistically, but like they've articulated that. Let's do that more, and let's do that in a more systematic way.
Actually, Southwest did that in the small area plan. Very, very articulate.
Right, and we haven't done very many small area plans. Southwest is one of the few exceptions. Since 2007, there were a lot of small area plans, and then there have only been a couple since then.
Nancy, do you want to talk to us? Having survived the Hein PUD for CHRS?
Don't really have any much more to say about that. I think I would be a little bit nervous about saying, although I think affordable housing should be a citywide priority, making that necessary on the PUD things. I think maybe our ANCs in Ward 7 and 8 also have other very important priorities, and affordable housing, at least they see quite often that there's a lot of affordable housing in their neighborhoods, and we need to, whatever they need to do. So I think it's very fine to have that as a citywide thing, but I would be nervous about saying all ANCs have to have that as their most important thing.
Matthew, do you want to get a word in edgewise?
Sure. So I want to go back to actually what Meredith started with, which was information asymmetry. So this is not the District Department's interpretation of it. It's not this side of me that's speaking. It's this side of me that's speaking. Right. No, yeah, it's this one. Right. So I play poker, and my goal is to find out what my opponent's cards hold. I play bridge. My goal is to find out which opponent holds which cards. So in terms of information asymmetry, in addition to these great ideas, right? Because when Councilmember, what you had mentioned, I was like, oh my God, it'd be great if there were a database. And then you said there will be. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. So that gives you a menu to choose from. But with each developer and with each parcel, there will be a different set of information basics that vary vastly, even from one block to another. So it might be helpful for an ANC to consider going systematically back across the PUDs that it has done and say, I wish I had known this at the beginning. I wish I had known that at the beginning, because you'll see what happens with the development, right? And you learn from that development and then find a way to either informally or perhaps through, I don't know if you know a council member, maybe formally through law, identify a method by which to gather that information at the beginning for the next one and the next one.
Almost like a best practices review.
Yeah.
I mean, it certainly comes to mind when I think about redeveloping Greenleaf, which is fantastic. And there are so many lessons learned from the redevelopment of Arthur Caper that build first is of course central. So I hope that it is locked down. But there are so many other things that I would have done differently in Arthur Caper, and I don't see a mechanism to force them to sort of come to fruition in Greenleaf. This is really a public space issue, but it's a best practices from a PUD perspective.
Charles, how do people, once the PUD is done, who takes a look at it afterwards to make sure they actually did what they were supposed to do? Because I know Meredith backed me up. There's at least one PUD that has to do with the Mandarin Oriental, where they never paid the money that they said they were going to pay.
It's a great question, and I think that the responsibility is supposed to lie with DIMPET, the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development. I don't believe there is an active effort to be able to do that type of follow through. I know that when I have gone to the office or to the deputy mayor to say, what about this or what about that, they'll then do the follow up. But I think it's a great point that as a city, we could be doing a lot better when it comes to having somebody on that end who holds the accountability. And ultimately, all those deals go through the deputy mayor's office from the city's perspective. Again, like the PUDs don't come through the council for approval, for example. It is DIMPED. Zoning has an ability to do some accountability as well, but it really probably needs to be initiated for DIMPED.
David, doesn't, when we look at affordable housing commitments, aren't they tied to the C of O?
Yes, I think the affordable housing, we're getting a little bit into some legalistic details that I know some, but a little bit fuzzy. I think the enforceability of having the affordable housing is there, that they're not going to be able to get it. The problems we've had in the past has been around the administration then of like finding the people to get in the affordable housing, though that's been improved. But with other kinds of benefits, I agree. Like what I've heard from other agency commissioners is that, you know, with benefits that are not just about affordable housing, there's an enforcement challenge.
Well, Charles, didn't you just go through this with the issue with buses where you actually forced the wharf to record it in the deed? Banning buses from the southwest.
So you're talking
part.
about the phase?
Yeah, so are deeds the place to look? Is it certificate of occupancy? Is there something we can tie accountability to?
I don't know if that's we might be getting the weeds for the audience here. I don't know if that's the best example, because we actually, if you ask DDOT, we were actually very redundant with the actions that we took. So when it comes to the prohibition on the buses, DDOT.
You don't understand, there's a new park in Southwest, right next to where the ships launch, and there was some issue with buses dropping off people. I see Southwest residents, Barbara's nodding, dropping off people right next to there, and the buses idling, sitting in the park. So the issue was, how do we force the buses out of there by tying that requirement to something that would outlast the development?
So it was written into the zoning order. It was written into the agreement with the ANC. And then I moved legislation partly because my Southwest neighbors asked me to, they didn't trust it was in the zoning order, they didn't trust that. The signs were already up, so we could enforce it, but they said we'd really feel even more comfortable if you pass a law. And so we passed legislation. And DDOT supported it, but they also said, guys, you've already written it in here, here. So that's, I mean, that example was one where maybe we did a little overkill because we wrote it into the law, we wrote it into the zoning order, we wrote it into the community benefits agreement. But if it ends up that's how we ensure that that agreement is done, the redundancy maybe didn't really matter. We just took care of it.
But one case that I remember, there wasn't a PUD, but actually across the street from me in DuPont Circle, there was a development that needed some DCA, some zoning really needed.
Zoning adjustment for those people who don't know.
Yeah, sorry, and so they were negotiating with the neighbors. I was part of the negotiating committee on that to negotiate for things like roof deck hour limitations, and amplified music limitations, and making sure that like move-in trucks would always be in the loading dock in the back instead of on the front in front of people's houses. And these were all reasonable things, and in exchange they were going to get like 6% more lot occupancy in the back, which kind of wasn't really hurting anyone to grant. We had a whole MOU worked out between the developer and neighbors, but then the AG's office gave the ANC commissioner at the time, our ANC commissioner, an opinion that suggested that maybe it wouldn't be enforceable, and that made them all scared, and then the ANC decided not to vote for it, so we lost the MOU. And then subsequently we got it back through a very commonly different way. But it looked like that was not going to happen. So the challenge is making sure, so I think, so I'm glad that you were able to do that with the case that Charles was talking about. Because we had examples where, where there's a fear that one enforcement mechanism is not going to work. I know another one in Ward 3 where they wanted to have restrictions on RPP residential parking that people could get, and DDOT does not have a policy that allows that. So that agency came up with this whole like legal contract mechanism that they had a contract with the developer, that the developer ever got the RPPs, even though they were allowed to, then there would be a bunch of penalties that like they'd agree to separately.
Well, that actually
That's
is
kind of going around.
that's a
all
problem
process.
all over Ward 6.
Yeah.
One of the things that the agencies often will negotiate RPP restrictions on new buildings, and in return, the developer gets reduced, doesn't have to build as much parking. What people don't know is that the zoning order that's issued by the zoning commission, when you do a planned unit development, the zoning commission, which is a federal appointed body, and I see Peter May around here is probably going to duck out, is actually one of the commissioners, and he's going to be, he's invisible over there. Imagine he's Harry Potter with cloak of invisibility, and a wonderful Ward 6 resident. Zoning orders do not bind on public space. They do not bind DDOT. And so all of the agreements that ANC's worked out to restrict RPP, none of them restrict DDOT from doing whatever it wants. Charles, what do you think about that?
Well, so here's what also happens. Is about 2 years or so after the first residents move into that new building that they negotiated no RPP, those residents then start calling their council member and saying, hey, why does the building not have RPP? DDOT told me to call you to fix that. So it creates conflict. But I know that we have a lot of examples of buildings here in Ward 6 where the ANC negotiated that, and then that building does not have RPP. And then I get all the angry phone calls saying, well, my RPP.
Well, you are the sheriff.
Apparently. So I don't think that it works. I think there's, why does the ANC and the community negotiate that? Well, because it's inherently different, that RPP for a big residential building than it is for homes on a block, right? If every single resident in a high-density building was able to park on the street, you quickly run out of the space, whereas, at least in theory, on your kind of R4 residential spaces, the housing and the car spaces kind of match up. But there's an argument to be made, at least I think our RPP system is rather broken. But in terms of the way that it works, so the system we live under, there is an equity argument that I hear frequently from residents who say, well, wait a minute, my neighbor who lives over in this neighborhood where they have RPP gets to be able to drive around their ward and be able to park, and when they're going to support businesses, they're going to a park, they're headed to school, wherever they're going, they get to do that, but I don't. Why is that fair? I frankly think that it's time for us to take a really big step and look at our RPP system for the entire space. I mean, it is the best deal in town to be able to have basically a year's worth of parking for $35 for as many cars as you want. I think we need to be smarter about it. We need to be more nuanced about it. For anybody who lives near a metro station, you see it on your block because everybody in the ward can park outside on your block. So it doesn't even work the way that it's intended to.
Come visit the wharf.
But I want to clarify what Charles is talking about, pointing out a strange distortion and a real problem with the way RPP works, which is there's two things you get with the RPP, right? This is what he's been saying. I just want to kind of amplify and make it clear. Number one, you get the ability to park in the immediate area where you live. And for some of these buildings, they have a big enough garage, and maybe that's not an issue. But the other thing you get is the ability to park in other parts of the ward. So in much lower density wards, like 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, there are people that live on blocks where they have no RPP in it. There were just no restrictions on the street, and there was never a problem. There was plenty of space because maybe it was detached houses, and they all have driveways. So almost no one. It's only if you have a party and guests park there. And yet, people will petition to get RPP on their block, not because there's any problem with parking. There's no metro. There's no shopping. Right there. They have no reason, but because they want to drive to the other part of the ward. And that is not the purpose of RPP, and it's kind of ridiculous. So they're actually restricting other people from parking. Like then their guests come visit them, and their guests can't park on the street anymore because they just got RPP. So now they need a placard in order to give to their guests. It's like you're compounding silly policy. Silly policy. I'm not trying to be, when you want to make this negative. The policy problem after policy problem. So, there's a lot of things we could do. I mean, one would be the purpose of RPP. I know some neighborhoods don't like this. I'll say it though, like the purpose was to park near where you live. So this whole idea that it's a license to park in some other part of the city, like I get to park in Georgetown because I live in Ward 2 and you don't, right? Why? Is that fair? Like, I don't think that's fair. And I have this special privilege to park on the residential blocks in Georgetown that all of you don't have. And there's this weird thing in Shaw that Charles could talk about, because this whole fight about like who gets that because it's 6 and 2. So ANC, last point, so the ANC that I live in 2B, which is DuPont, has actually said in a resolution they would like to see just a smaller zone so that it is that you can park in DuPont. If you live in DuPont, you park in DuPont. That's it. That's the purpose of our.
All right, let's bring it back to Ward 6.
Real fast, what I was gonna say, if you don't think parking is a third rail, just go talk to Tommy Wells. I have only.
Why did he touch it?
Do you remember that? I have only been booed one time. I'm proud of that. I'm sure there'll be a second and a third at some point. But I've only been booed one time at a community meeting, and that was when I suggested that we should be looking at subzones for RTP. It's a hot topic. We have a lot of strong feelings about it, but I do hope that we can at least acknowledge that our RPP system isn't quite working the way we intended.
Meredith, do you,
Well, certainly. I mean, RPP is inherently unfair.
I
And
didn't think we were gonna discuss this.
I struggle with when DDOT opened the comment period, whatever it was 3 years ago. We certainly weighed in on the details of RPP, but our prefacing letter was, it's unfair. One challenge is, for example, in a highly dense neighborhood, you said the best deal in town, it's probably not priced right. There's this whole challenge then, well, especially in a mixed income neighborhood, if you were to start to match the RPP price with the commodity, it will have, a whole swath of my residents couldn't afford it and don't have an alternative. So it's very challenging and people are finding it incredibly frustrating. And what I was telling people, but it's interesting. So whenever someone emails me about parking, which is all the time, I learned very quickly, I never email back. I say we have to have coffee because it's a complicated issue. And so what I say to people is and I may very well be getting booed as well, what you want is affordable, convenient parking. And you have convenient parking in your building, but it's not affordable. If I were to fight for you to get RPP, I would fight for you to get RPP, and you get RPP. And eventually, if everyone may get RPP, just the geometry doesn't work. There's no parking. The person who would get the parking is the person who never moves their car. And DDOT would laugh at us anyway. So I said, well, can you think about ways to maybe chip away at the affordability piece? Can we start to, and I know this is a taboo word at this point, but can you Airbnb your parking space? You always hear, oh, well, the serial killers are going to come in. It's nonsense. You have shared residential commercial parking all through, National Landing now. So there are things we can do. What's interesting, though, in Alpert is now the developers have said, hey, we've got all this empty parking during the day when people are at work. So we're going to take away your assigned space and we're going to start to optimize it. So it makes it actually very difficult to then chip away the affordability piece. So I'm struggling with and it's not my decision, but what is the policy recommendation that starts to make this feel a little bit less unfair. But I do want to say the third thing, Dave had outlined 2 big pieces, but the third thing, this one I think we can do something with, is the VPP. So the trouble is...
Visitor parking permit.
Right. And you
can apply at DDOT for them. If you live in RPP, you get one, and you can give it to a visitor, like I give mine to my girlfriend when she comes to visit.
And so I think VPP is very important and very useful, and I've got 3 kids and my parents come down and we use it. The challenge is in a lot of these high rises, there are no guest parking spaces. So there's literally no option. And so what I wish when you think about things we would look back on is, could we have gone back in these PUDs and carved out more guest parking spaces? And it's sort of a strange thing, well, if you carve out a guest parking space, then that's not a resident parking space, and maybe that drives the prices up. But we do need some kind of answer around guest parking for people who don't have VPP options. And I don't know what it is, but I think we need to figure it out.
It was funny because I was at her ANC meeting where I'm reporter of record. I stood up as a resident after the head of parking for DDOT came in and explained to us that he was taking an entire side of the street across my house, which had been RPP, for a school pickup and drop-off zone. This is approximately 2 blocks. And he said, it's no problem. You can still park there because, during the day, to drive off to work and you come back at night, there'll be a parking space. And I looked at him and I said, I don't drive to work, I walk. That's not, you don't understand the way we use our cars. We don't use them frequently to commute when we live in the city. Now, over to Matthew. No, you don't comment on this.
No,
This is a third rail you won't touch.
No, I will, but I'm gonna tie it back. This is Matthew-ish, right? So this is a little bit of me in the department, but also me as a resident. I have BPP, I have a visitor parking pass, and I don't even own a car. Because you don't have to own a car to get a visitor parking pass. I live on an RPP block, and one of the reasons I have it, and I don't need it for these, I own 1,000 cars. They're called Car2Go, Civic Car, Capital Bike Share, Avis, Enterprise. I haven't owned a car since 1999, and it's awesome. But this ties back actually to a lot of what we were discussing before. People are exceptionally tied to, protective of, and defensive about their cars. So a lot of the prior discussion didn't include that implicit point that does impact all of the other discussions we were having. So in the end, it all comes back to this point. We have limited public space. They're not making any more. It is also the most valuable asset you own. If you take every other asset you own as a citizen, not as individuals, but you take all the government offices, all the government resources and tools and vehicles and X and Y, the land, you take all of the school land, and you take all of the MPD land, and you take all of the park land, and you put it all together, and you put it in a balance, and bam! It's a huge amount. It's valuable. You just take the public space. Just take the public space. Just that. Put it on the other side of the balance scale, bam! Much more valuable. You have entrusted the Department of Transportation, and my office particularly, with that exceptionally valuable asset. And I know that there are people in the room who would hope that we had done a better job about how we manage it, and a better job about how we plan it, and a better job about how we enforce it. I just want to say on behalf of the Department of Transportation, we are 1,000 people who are dedicated to taking all of these varied interests, all of these very challenging and evolving uses, and finding a way to integrate and adapt that ever-changing jigsaw puzzle together. We appreciate your patience with us. We appreciate your driving us forward. We appreciate your giving us great suggestions and valuable ideas. But in the end, it all comes back to this. This is about individuals, their individual choices, their individual actions, their individual assets, and how they choose to live their lives and interact with others, particularly through driving, whether it's a scooter, a powered bike, walking, driving a vehicle, etc. And we try very desperately every day to do our best to give you a safe and efficient traffic network.
Nancy, do you have anything to say about the third rail? Will you actually touch it?
I won't really touch it, I'll just say, probably we've talked about RPP and VPP a lot, and maybe there's some other questions, but they are.
All I was going to say is that one of the things people don't realize is RPP started in Arlington when Metro came in the 70s. Where's Mimi Wolf? Mimi's husband was part of a lawsuit that CHRS filed an amicus brief when Arlington got sued by people that didn't live there that said, well, you can't, under the 14th Amendment, restrict me from parking on public streets. And CHRS actually filed an amicus brief and Arlington won. And that's when RPP started, because the problem, the origin of RPP is people driving in, parking around metros so they can take the metro the rest of the way, ironically. Little known fact.
Unintended consequences.
Oh, you want to say
of public
something,
transit.
Mimi? We're gonna.
They actually started it here on Capitol Hill, and then after that, it went through all throughout the United States.
There you go. Let's move on away from parking to the question of public. You said public space, as Matthew says, is our most valuable asset. Does the Department of Transportation need more adult supervision? For example, on the private side, we have 2 appointed boards. The zoning commission, you can duck now again, and also the Bureau of Zoning, the Board of Zoning Adjustment, which are citizen organizations appointed who essentially provide guidance on the private side of land use. And what if we had a similar thing for public space? Should we have a board of public space? Charles wants to say something.
Sure. When is the last time you felt that the Board of Zoning Adjustment or the Zoning Commission, that you had accountability over that? No, you don't. So I would not suggest creating a board over DDOT's management of public space, because I think we would lose a degree of accountability. From an accountability system and the checks and balances, we've got the council and we have a committee whose job is transportation, public works, environment. I sit on that committee, Mary Shea chairs it. I can guarantee by the number of hearings that I've sat in with the director of DDOT or the director of DPW, we hold a lot of hearings and we do a lot of oversight over those agencies. So the legislative body has a direct oversight role over the department. And then of course, you all get to have direct accountability, or we have direct accountability to you. You help hold us accountable through elections. If you had a board structure, I think that accountability actually gets missed and lost. And so I would not support that.
Anybody else?
I would say that in my experience, as we were working earlier, like the overwhelming majority of sort of public space issues sort of work the way they are supposed to. And when they haven't, we've gone to the Public Space Committee, and Matthew and his team has been extraordinary. And if ever Matthew were not to be there and that were to change, the answer is not to create a different body, but to get the right people in this role. And I've been consistently impressed with the thoughtfulness and your sort of, I remember one of the first times I went to the Public Space Committee was an issue about a curb cut for Van Ness. And you very quickly, I was still developing expertise, and I think I've been a commissioner for a hot minute. And you very quickly said, what are we all trying to achieve? And the curb cut that we were or were not fighting for wasn't really the issue. And so I think it's working.
Matthew, you want to talk a little bit about your committee, your baby?
Sure. So earlier today, the reason I put the microphone down was because you had asked about like having a board that doesn't have to go, but it exists. So there's a committee called the Public Space Committee. It has existed at least since the 1930s. It's been constituted through various government bodies that have governed the District of Columbia. Thank goodness for home rule. It currently exists under a mayor's order, and it is an established body of people who are government employees. I'm one of them. It's also represented by the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, the Office of Planning, the Mayor's Office. And the purpose of the body is to hear uses of public space by private entities. So our office, my office, regulates private users of public space, utilities, developers, individuals moving into the District of Columbia, all the way up to the Capital Grid project that Petco has had to build, which is a giant transmission line from Tacoma down to Buzzard. What the Public Space Committee hears is a carved out piece of those thousands, tens of thousands of permits that are issued annually. And they hear the ones that are either A, specifically identified in regulation, like sidewalk cafes, valet parking, intercity bus operations, that are going to come to the committee, or B, those types of uses of public space that the Public Space Committee has identified as necessary for us to hear. Because ultimately, every permit that my office as the Public Space Regulation Division issues is issued under the authority of the Public Space Committee, not the Department of Transportation, coincidentally. It's a delegated authority through the Public Space Committee. So we hear things from every driveway. That was a decision we made because we recognized that any brand new driveway has a direct impact that goes for generations. It's not a decision that goes away next year. It goes for generations to the properties. And the people believe that they have a right to it when it's really a permitted use of public space that can be revoked at any time. So the Public Space Committee is a 5-party body that has existed for nearly a century to hear uses of public space. We do it in an open meeting. And one of the things we don't do that everybody else I think does, one of the things we don't do is we don't put timers on people. I've had one person talk in front of the committee for a half an hour straight. Oh, okay, great, keep going. I was eating my popcorn, having soda, and listening to what they said, because the most important thing they said was in the 25th minute. I was like, oh my God, that's really important. I wrote that down, and I made sure we came back to it. So long story short, that's what the Public Space Committee is. It's the equivalent of the Board of Zoning Adjustment, the Zoning Commission, the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board, the Historic Preservation Board, in its management of private users of public space. Sorry, I talk a lot, I apologize.
I have a question for you. Should it be established by more than the overall board?
I think it's not broken. I really don't think it's broken. I don't think the committee, I've actually gotten compliments about how the committee operates from people against whom we decided against whom we came down on an application against their interest. That was really poorly worded. Normally, it was so much better earlier today. Long story short, we decided against their application. They still wrote us a thank you letter saying we really appreciate being heard. We understood the decision, and we felt like we got our opportunity.
David, do you want to weigh in, and Nancy?
I would just say, I think when I read the public space design guidelines, and I did talk to Christian, OP, and I originally thought, well, I'm not sure about, I think the Public Space Committee does probably work very well. I was a little nervous about all these agencies, lining up and not paying that much attention to us citizens, and I don't know all of the cases, so. But I thought, in looking at it, I thought, well, I really think there needs to be a landscape architect on this board. Although Matthew's raising an eyebrow, and I know why, because Christian is a landscape architect, but it's not a person, there's not a carve out. And I do think in all the things that they look at, landscape architects' point of view, and maybe it's one of those positions that doesn't represent an agency, but a profession that might be very useful for the committee to have. The other one that I was thinking about, and maybe it's covered, is the environment. That maybe there are citizen profession people that could be added somehow.
Is DOE on your public space committee or not?
So DOEE is a reviewer of every application that comes before the Public Space Committee. The Urban Forestry Division, which has multiple landscape architects, is also a reviewer of every application that comes before the Public Space Committee. And every ANC that's impacted by an application is provided notice of the applications prior to their coming to us. And we also have a dual method of notifying ANCs. We mail by a priority mail, which is even higher level than is required by law. In addition, we have an online system. I think Meredith, you've used our online system. We have an online system that allows people reviewers like ANCs, to go online, see the applications, and review and comment both online and through paper form.
David, you want to weigh in?
I mean, I can be brief. I think also generally it works fine. Can other people who aren't reviewers see the applications, and if not, why? That would be a question for you.
So they can.
Okay.
Our applications, to a limited degree, and this is something, okay, I love transparency. I would rather make my mistakes in public than in private, because a public mistake can be excused, but a private mistake can be exploited. So I'd rather make the mistakes in public, which is why the hearings go on forever. In addition, I want to make as many of my records available to the public. There are limits on what we're allowed to do, and I've been asking for some legal guidance as well as, let's call it documentary guidance from DDOT experts who are much smarter than I will ever be on how I can do that. We make for example, every one of our applications is available online, both through a map system as well as through a search and function system. This is something you should have on your web browser, and it should be your homepage. TOPS, T-O-P-S, maps.dot.dc.gov. You don't need to log in, you don't need to have a username. You can go to the map tool, which is at the bottom of the page, just type in an address, it'll take you right there, and every application will immediately appear as an icon on the screen. Click on it, you can drill down into more details, gives you more information about who the applicant is, what they're applying for, etc. We try to make our system, I work for you every day, and I want to make my system and my work as open and available to you as possible.
Do you make good coffee?
Yes, we have, I don't make it, so that's why it's really good coffee, but we do have chocolate at every
It works for me every day, so something like coffee. Now, on another note, we're about to, two more topics that have become a little bit controversial, and you just had a huge hearing on this. So you may not comment, or you can. We're about to add phone capacity at an enormous rate, and this involves devices that are put up on poles. And
Is it 9 o'clock yet?
so, does anybody have any thoughts or want to be a little, actually, Matthew, do you want to define what I'm talking about a little bit more, because I'm not specific.
Yeah, I might be right now the subject matter expert on this. So what we're talking about is called small cell technology. Telecommunications has obviously exploded in the same way that transportation has exploded. And the capacity of the existing network and infrastructure is not able to handle not just what is happening today, but what is expected to happen tomorrow. So with autonomous vehicles, right? With smart city technology, with cameras being able to be everywhere, the goal would be to have a network that can handle that capacity. As a result, telecommunication companies have developed new technology that would be more ubiquitous throughout the system, throughout the community, because broadly speaking, their ability to manage their network across, most especially in public areas and public space, has maxed out or is maxing out. As a result, they have developed a set of technologies that are smaller in size, but that require lower in power, but that are required, therefore, to be closer to the user. So they have deployed these assets across the country in a variety of locations, Denver, Boston, etc. It's typically attached either to a street light or it's attached to a utility pole. There are occasions where they are established on freestanding poles. Over the course of more than a year, the Department of Transportation, with the Office of the Chief Technology Officer and the telecom industry, has engaged in a dialogue and a structured program within the parameters of the Federal Communications Commission, which has established very specific and very structured limits on what municipalities can do in regards to certain elements of the telecom industry and their regulation in public space. And through that process, which has been engaged with the public as well, we've held at least a half a dozen public meetings over the course of the last year to engage in how this soon-to-be ubiquitous asset will be deployed in, again, limited public space where there are already existing and competing structures and uses.
So, for those of you who want to know what these things look at, like if you pick up the November Hill Rag, there's a whole article with photos, so you can see what they look like. Does anybody have any thoughts on new ubiquitous doohickeys on poles?
Can I add potential new doohickeys? Okay, so I still have a lot to learn about the small cell technology. I was actually going to go in a slightly different vein, but this is the type of things I think, you haven't asked this question yet, I'm just going to ask it, is what do we think what should we be thinking about for the next 20 years, next 30 years around our public space? One of the things that I believe we should be trying to think through as it relates to like how does new technology impact our use of the public space is we've talked around the fact that it takes a while for technology of electric vehicles to be able to start to become accessible to everybody. But if we're going to move away from filling up, our tanks with cars with gas in our car and move towards electric vehicles, then we also have to build an infrastructure that then allows us to be able to recharge said vehicles. And we don't have that right now. And we barely scratched the surface. We think we're smart with like a pilot where we'll do 1 or 2 charging stations per ward. That's not really much of an infrastructure. But so if I'm trying to think through 20 years from now, the same way that we start thinking about how does this small cell technology work, and then how do we use our existing public infrastructure in public space, I think we should be now trying to think about the impacts of this. For example, we know that we can't just create big, giant parking lots full of charging stations. Why are we not thinking about our public space, though? So that every streetlight could be converted in a way that has a charging station that can be attached to it. Imagine as technology in the next 10 or 20 years gets to a place where that becomes affordable, becomes accessible, and you can start using your public space in that way. Does all of a sudden you create the infrastructure where that charging can take place? How does that impact our ability to really embrace and use new technology, which is much more sustainable, much more resilient, but we build it out in a different way? I think I see some parallels to kind of the challenges if you're thinking through the small cell technology, that we have this built environment, we have this built infrastructure, and so what are the things that we can start projecting out of ways in which we use the public space to achieve the goal?
Back to doohickeys for a minute. What do people think about what this will look like? Yes, you want to talk from a preservation standpoint?
Well, since I've heard several things about how they would look or how many feet apart they have to be, and what about trees, and trees have to be trimmed. I don't think I'm in a good position other than to say they do seem to be like they're going to be very obvious, and then will that make a difference in what I just don't feel like I have enough.
Well, what were the questions you have? I mean, you went through, instead of answering them, what are the questions that concern you?
Well, whether the trees will be affected by this, whether it's 35 feet apart, in addition to our light poles, and other things that are going down the street. How are all these things going to look as you go down the street? Or even, that's another thing that the car doors run into. Not that we're worried about cars that much, but that's another issue where they should be, what they look like up at the top, how they actually function.
Matthew, will some of these be in private space as well, as people going to be renting the sides of their houses to put these things up?
So they actually are already on rooftops of buildings, and you don't even see them, and you don't know that they're there. The private property, you might be able to see some of them. Let me rephrase that. You don't notice them very common, and one of the reasons is because they're typically in areas that are denser, where there are more people, and typically the buildings are a little higher, and these are higher power equipment, so they can be a little further away. But all the questions that are being asked are very important, and you, the citizens, have multiple opportunities to provide us feedback. That also, by the way, goes for I think they're called personal mobility devices, as opposed to scooters. There are opportunities through the DDOT website to comment on all of these. For example, small cell guidelines, the proposed small cell guidelines, which are still under development, they're in a draft form, which address many of the issues that you're talking about, as well as actual representations of the exact deployments that telecom companies propose to provide, as well as information from the Commission of Fine Arts, National Capital Planning Commission, Historic Preservation Office, which have all been part of this partnership in developing the guidelines, are available online at ddot.dc.gov, and it's one of the first links to the webpage that includes all of that information.
So these guidelines are going to set where these doohickeys can go.
They'll set all all of the parameters that were being discussed. They'll set their frequency along a block. They'll set limits on their height. They'll set parameters related to how they can appear. There's equipment that's not just the antenna, but there's also a cabinet that's associated with them. And they come in two classes. There's Class A, which is larger, and Class B, which is smaller. And then there's the associated cabinetry, the wiring and the power that has to go to those antennas. Class A and Class B are ways of identifying antennas, and then there's cabinets that support those. And these guidelines discuss all of those. And we could not come to a better decision if you do not, we can't come to the best decision if you don't give us your feedback. Okay? We sat for 8 hours on October 15th, 8 hours without a clock on anybody, so they could tell us what they thought about cell phone technology, whether they were for it, whether they were the industry, whether they were against it, whether they had concerns about trees. By the way, all the telecom companies, see, I'll talk forever, you shouldn't give me a microphone. I'm gonna tell you two things about trees. Number one, all the telecom companies have explicitly stated that they will sign a letter to notify the world. They are not gonna prune trees, and they are not gonna remove trees to install their infrastructure and equipment, number one. And then number two, the Urban Forestry Division is reviewing every application, and the guidelines set standards for how far they have to be from our trees based on what Urban Forestry tells us. So we absolutely hear your concerns, and the more of your concerns we get, the better and more complete the guidelines will be. Strongly encourage you to do it. The binder I have on it right now is literally this thick. I'd rather have volumes of that than not.
In a while, I don't think we need that tonight.
No, I've only been perfectly following this, so I'll save my time for the next question to think.
Meredith, do you have a comment?
We have not had the bandwidth to develop expertise we need at this point on this issue.
Okay.
Is this, just out of curiosity, is it,
You
did
need
you
small
go
thumbs.
through a similar discussion when the cable companies put infrastructure all over our streets when cable came in?
Do I look that old? So, I do, shoot. I did not, because I wasn't with the Department of Transportation at the time. Are you talking about FiOS? Or are you talking
I'm
about?
thinking of all the Comcast cabinets and all of them.
No, but they, all of those require, and that goes back to what I do for a living. I regulate and manage private users of public space. So all of that equipment, by and large, requires a permit from my office. There are carved out exceptions related to the franchise agreement for certain cable equipment, et cetera. By and large, all of those require a permit from my office. So we do see and touch on all of these. And as their technology and as their equipment evolves and adapts, we look at them very carefully before, most especially something that's ubiquitous, gets deployed.
So we're going to end with one final question, which is dump trucks. Two words that probably are both four-letter words in most neighborhoods. And part of regulating public space is regulating movement of construction vehicles through public space. And what I'm curious about, and maybe you can start, and Meredith, you can jump in because it's a big one for you guys, is there somebody in DDOT who has who's map of every single dump truck that's moving and understands relation? Because if you look below the highway, or if you go down to where where the Safeway is, there's so many projects going on, and every time an AMC hears a project, the project people come with a traffic plan. Well, the traffic guy has been paid to make it look like the project will be fine. And when you talk to the traffic guy, and I watched this at the AMC, that traffic guy has not thought about what the neighborhood is going to look like in the 2 years after he, when he really gets his dump truck moving, nor has he talked to any other developer about their dump trucks. So do you want to talk about this, Meredith? Because I know it's a big deal.
So it's really interesting. What I've learned as a best practice as a commissioner in Navy Yard is now, before any project starts in the neighborhood that I have some sort of ability to have leverage over, and most volunteer anyway, is I have a pre-construction meeting. And what we've been asking in these pre-construction meetings has gotten more and more sophisticated as we've lived through more and more construction. And so we talk about what are the exact phases of construction. So developers say, well, there's excavation. And then I would say, let's be clear, that is 70 weeks of dump trucks every, 15, 30 minutes prior. And then they'll say, well, it's, 40 months of concrete pours. And then I will say that's 40 weeks of a concrete truck every 10 minutes, because people need to know what's coming. So as I've gone through many of these, I started asking about when are the public utility tie-ins, because now I understand, well, of course, that means the street's gonna be closed. It's gonna be closed for several weeks, and this is what it's gonna feel like, and you're gonna be really mad. And frankly, when a site started by South Capital, I said to people, here's the truth. You probably just don't wanna drive that way, because it's going to make you miserable, because they're going to be in the public space with the utility connection for 12 weeks. So in this one that Matthew was a tremendous help on, we also said, well, where are the truck routes? We can't stomach any more trucks going through New Jersey in a night. It's already dicey. We've asked DDOT to expedite a traffic light. It's already, we just cannot survive it. And so now at these pre-construction meetings, we have everyone map out what are the truck routes. And it's not so simple as just saying, well, I don't like this, because there's the width of the street, there's the 12 other projects that are going on. And so when we can say to DDOT in a compelling fashion, hey, this plan that should work doesn't, then we will go back to them. And we worked extensively on a project together, and I think the outcome of it, it was the best possible outcome. We did all kinds of safe accommodation, we moved truck routes, we opened up sidewalks, and
We moved parking.
we did a protected bike lane. So it takes a
village.
a tremendous amount of attention to detail on everything to try to make livability and development work together.
Weigh in on this one?
Well, I'm just gonna say, if there's a map of where all the dump trucks are, my 2-year-old son really would like to see that map. Because we had a construction project across the street from us, and he was the only person on the block that loved all the cement mixers coming in front and idling in front of our house and turning around and around, and he was just in heaven, and everyone else felt a little bit differently. He was just adoring it. So let's get that map and then show it to him.
I knew I had lived the ultimate Southwest life when I walked out of my house at 707th Street across from Jefferson one morning, walking my dog at 6 in the morning, and saw 45 dump trucks parked end to end all the way up 7th Street waiting to go to the wharf, which is the biggest dig I've ever seen in my life, and we're about to do that. Charles, you want to talk about dump trucks?
Next time that happens, please.
I'll call you.
We were at the airport, and he was counting the diggers. They're doing a big construction project at the airport to build a new terminal at National Airport. And so we were going out of it. He counted like 15 diggers, and it was just the best. On to serious topics.
Well, I know what Andrew's talking about with the work too. So when there's a big construction project, frequently they'll do what's called the topping out ceremony, where you get to show up and it's like the last beam that goes up at the very top, and then let get people to sign it and all of that. At work, we actually had a bottoming out ceremony where the very last dump truck, we all walked down the bottom of this massive hole with the seawall being held up. We just really hoped that it held. It was a lot of dirt that got moved. I think that the coordination, I mean, I certainly hear it from a community and neighborhood standpoint, is when we have these construction projects, how do we plan for that? How do we coordinate that? And it does feel like we do it project by project by project. I do think DDOT's getting better at this. It's one that I think we still have a lot of work to do, but I don't get as frequently as we used to. This is definitely in Meredith's neighborhood, where projects we get permits approved to close a sidewalk. The project across the street we get the permit to close their sidewalk, and the one down the block at their sidewalk, and all of a sudden there's nowhere to go. And I remember on New Jersey at one time on a weekend, every sidewalk was closed and people were just walking down the middle of the street. And this is back with Leif when he was the director, and I fortunately had his cell phone number. So called him up, and they had to rush over and try to come up with some bollards and barriers. But that happens less frequently than it used to. But it still should never happen. And that type of coordination is what we have to continue working with DDOT to make sure that there's people there who are seeing that big picture, they understand the timing and everything. And then there's one other piece I would add to the coordination of public space, pivoting just a little bit here. And I Street's a great example, again, in your neighborhood. I think we the next place where we gotta keep pushing is if you go down, when we think about like the bike lane on I Street, there's sections of it that actually are on the curb. There's sections of it that are right next to the road. There's sections of it completely destroyed right now by construction. But it does provide us an opportunity, and that's what I'd like to see all of us, whether that's ANC, my office, DDOT, everything. It also presents an opportunity for us to coordinate that in a way that you can actually have a really strong east-west connection where we can actually have a protected bike lane that's on the curbside. That to me is the opportunity that we're not yet seizing. And when we think about that public space coordination across the entire width, and I'll kind of bring it back to one of the things that David talked about is, like, as we have these conversations in public space, we have to have the policies that help guide each one of those decisions. And that to me is a big place where we have a lot of work to do.
When I first crossed I Street and saw the Fascett Memorial Bike Lane, I was very, very pleased. Anybody else you want to comment, Matthew?
I think Dave had a comment.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's time to talk about the closure. And we talk about whether we're going to talk about sidewalk closures. I do think another thing that we can work on, and Matt and I were talking about this before, is, as the construction sites close the sidewalk. So closing two sides of the street is a real problem. But even one side of the street, I think is a problem. And I have been taking a number of people I saw on Twitter, but I've been taking pictures as I go around the city, seeing, especially in the downtown and downtown adjacent area, seeing a lot of construction projects where, and sometimes it's following DDOT policies. I understand that sometimes it's not following DDOT policies. So if it's not following DDOT policies, they need to be fined. But sometimes it's following DDOT policies, they'll close the sidewalk and wrap them to the other side. But what has happened, and I have lots of pictures of these on 40th and G streets downtown, on 17th Street, and 20th Street downtown, and 20th and M, and then people are ending up walking in the road next to the construction project. Maybe there's a metro station, or it's in a heavy pedestrian area, they're walking in the road, even though it says cross. And so, earlier we were talking about how they would put a stop sign, drivers will misbehave, acknowledge that as a safety issue, that was their put. Well, here, we know that if we close the sidewalk, people are going to walk in the street anyway, and that raises a safety issue. And I think that while DDOT has been often good about asking people to create barriers so that you can walk between the construction site and a barrier to the road, I think there are a number of cases where even under the current public space policies that we're allowing or saying there's not a walkway, and then I see people walking in the road, and that seems to be dangerous, and hopefully we can find a way to let them walk in that protected walkway instead of making them cross the street, which we know they won't do.
One thing back to dump trucks, and then we're going to close. Dump trucks often wander off their routes. Not cement trucks.
What?
Not cement
Shock
trucks,
here.
because cement trucks are all owned by one company, but dump trucks. Have you ever thought of putting GPSs on dump trucks so when they wander off, you can find them? Like you do with Uber and Lyft, like you do fenced out areas?
Hold on, I'm dreaming about that wonderful moment. That would just be totally awesome. Actually, you know what? Okay. So yes, I will be able to do it. I gotta figure out how I can make it happen, but yeah, so to get you your map, I think I have a way to do it. It's gonna take me a little while, but I have a solution. So but I will make it super quick. Dump trucks should have a 65 tag. What's a 65 tag? The 65 tag is a tag that's issued by my office that goes on particular categories of commercial vehicles. Dump trucks and concrete trucks are the ones that are most commonly using these. They're called 65s because it governs a vehicle that is up to 65,000 in gross vehicular weight. It'll have a 4-digit number and then a DC flag and then a 65. I don't know what the current color iteration is, but every year we change it because it's an annual tag and it's enforced by NPD. Sergeant Schaefer, who is totally awesome in their motor carrier safety division. So we even have a program where we know every single dump truck and concrete truck. Those don't have GPSs on them. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about. Maybe I can find a way to put it on the license and have a way to have that license, have it physically put into the license plate. Maybe an RFID. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But to the point that you were making about the difference between concrete and dump trucks. So dump trucks are going to carry the vast majority of vehicle trips at a construction site. More than 50% will just be the excavation. And dump trucks are like a machine. It's 5 minutes on the site and they're done. 5 minutes on the site and they're done. 5 minutes on the site and they're done. And they're just filling up and moving and filling up and moving and filling up and moving. That's why that section is the one that to us is the most important to control. So we do manage their routes. However, a concrete truck is owned by a company. A dump truck is owned by a wildcat. It's a person who that morning woke up and decided the night before they found out what site they were going to go to and they went to that site. And then they don't care how they get there. They don't care how they get away from there because they make money per load. So they want to go, bam, what's the fastest way to get there? Bam, what's the fastest way to get there? Bam, what's the fastest way to get out? Bam, what's the fastest way to get out? If I can control that behavior, I try desperately, but it's very challenging. It's challenging for the contractors because we hold them accountable as well. So we are looking at methods by which we can do that, but you can see how challenging that would be. How do you control the truck that's 2 blocks off the site or 4 blocks off the site? You don't have an inspector just sitting at that location. And then that's inspectors. The 20 inspectors I have, 20 inspectors for 67 square miles and 50,000 permits annually.
And the buses.
And the buses, right? So long story short, we're doing the best we can with the limited resources we have to make sure you have what you need, which includes making sure that approved traffic control plans are available online. So if you go to our website, you'll be able to actually look at the approved traffic control plan, which should also include the truck route. And in addition, I'll use one last closing point, which is, yes, we are looking at these holistically. The last time you drove through M Street off of South Capitol Street heading west, heading east, you actually passed 5 active work zones at once. 5 active work zones at once. But they only had 1 traffic control plan. Because they were each like, no, I have my own traffic control plan. I got mine. No, I got mine. You got yours. You got yours. No, we told them it's 1 traffic control plan. Each of you owns your part of it, but it is 1 traffic control plan because you, the public, experience it as a single traffic control plan. Plus, we took away a lane on M Street and put a pedestrian path in there. I'm not saying we're really great at what we do, but we try very hard.
Charles, I once talked to one of those MPD officers who actually have mechanics. Do you know they can write $6,000 of tickets in a day? I bet if you triple the amount of people there and gave Marcou more budget, they pay for themselves. All right, audience, can we get a round of applause for our wonderful panelists? I want to thank the host and just be looking for the next Ward 6 matters, probably in the February timeframe.
Thank you.